the situation in Gaza will get much worse. Israel has announced it wants to totally empty out Gaza. It is a total war against the Palestinians, and they say that Israel shall be only for the Zionist population. The Israelis are not only attacking Gaza, but what is not reported in the United States is there's just as much attack on the West Bank. The idea is to drive out and preferably kill all of the Palestinians. Alistair Crook has said that it is not possible to have a two-state solution unless you have two states and only Jews live in Israel and only Jews live in Palestine. But there cannot be any Palestinians living in Palestine if there are two states. So any thought of a two-state solution is totally impossible now. That's what to realize. About a month ago, President Netanyahu held up a map, and it was all of Israel with no Palestinian state in it at all. No Gaza, no West Bank. And he said, this is our plan. There cannot be a single Palestinian left alive there. This is a fight to the death. And this is exactly what's happening there. He says resettlement, but the word that is being used in the United Nations is genocide. And the United States is backing Israel 100% in this. And you can imagine why. In 1967, during the Six-Day War that Israel waged, the United States had a naval ship, the USS Liberty, in the Mediterranean, collecting information. And the Israelis did not want the information to be collected. So it bombed the ship. It napalmed the ship. It bombed it. It attacked the United States sailors. It killed about 40, wounded 145. The army went to President Johnson and said, the Israelis are attacking and killing Americans. And President Johnson was so worried about the influence of pro-Israeli cabinets that when Abe Fortas and Supreme Court Justice, pressured him, don't do anything, Johnson covered up the murder of the American troops there. So when the United States will not even protect its own citizens, its own troops from Israeli attack, it obviously is not going to protect the Palestinians at all. The expectation is that in the next few days, Netanyahu is going to resume the bombing of Gaza and extend the bombing northwards to Lebanon. And the aim is to make Lebanon somehow respond and protect itself from being destroyed and treated like Gaza is treated. And Netanyahu is hoping this will lead President Biden to do what the neocons want to do, to declare war on Iran. Well, first of all, in the American press, when I look at the news, whenever they talk about Hamas, they say Iranian-backed Hamas. When they talked about Hezbollah in Lebanon, they say Iranian-backed troops in Iranian-backed Hezbollah. They keep blaming everything on Iran. There was recently bad weather. It's as if they're blaming the bad weather on Iran. The United States is willing to fight to the last Israeli. And Iran has said, if we're attacked, let's be very clear, there won't be any more Israel to fight over. And again, this is what many former CIA people like Larry Johnson and McCarthy have said. It's what Alistair Crook has said. The consensus is universal that America is trying to inflame the Near East because it's trying to maintain control of oil and to prevent Iranian oil and Near Eastern oil from being sent to China. The idea is to cut China off from oil supplies, just as it's cut Europe off, so that the United States negotiate with President Xi to say, we will resume oil trade with you, but here's what we want you to do to serve American foreign policy. As I think you know, the American officials were just in China trying to convince President Xi not to support Russia in the Ukrainian, in the NATO war in the Ukraine. Well, you can imagine how silly that is. Well, just the opposite. President Xi is quite correctly continued to back Russia, and so the United States is now extending its anti-Russian military and diplomatic strategy against China as well, and that is largely what the fight in the Near East is about. You can see the whole Near East going up. Well, obviously what's happened is that the attacks on Gaza and the attacks on the West Bank and the very speeches that Netanyahu gives, he's quoted the Bible, the Jewish Bible, and the book of the Judges, and said that, well, the Lord is telling him that he has to totally wipe out the enemy. That's the rhetoric he's using, the biblical rhetoric. And so what we're seeing now is in many ways a replay of the Crusades that began 1,000 years ago. And I want to say a few things about what happened in the Crusades, because it's very relevant to the way in which China and the global majority are breaking away from the West. In the 10th and 11th century, Christianity had 5 centers. The main center was in Constantinople, which is in present-day Turkey, Antioch in Asia Minor on the Mediterranean, Jerusalem, Alexandria in Egypt, and Rome. Rome was the backwater. Rome was the least important of all of the Christian churches, and it was for an entire century run by just a single corrupt Roman aristocratic family. And the Vatican history of the popes itself calls this century the pornocracy. In other words, the rule of the prostitutes. In Western Europe, an attempt to somehow take this backwater and take control of all of Christianity. And the way, what the Vatican did was make arrangement with the Norman invasions that were coming into Europe, and beginning with the Norman invasions in Sicily and southern Italy, the Vatican said, we will recognize your kingship if you agree to conquer Sicily, which at that time was very largely Muslim, and if you conquer southern Italy, which had a lot of Byzantine territories there. The popes wanted to take over the world and create an empire, but the problem is they had no army. You may remember when World War II ended, the Vatican was trying to play a role in how the post-war world would look after 1945, and Stalin said, well, how many troops does the Pope have? Well, in 1945, the Pope didn't have any troops. And that was the case in the 11th century. That's when the popes began to make a deal, first with the Normans in Sicily, Robert Guiscard, and then with William the Conqueror, the Norman conquest of England in 1066. We will back you and support you if you continue to pay tribute to Rome and you use their army to fight our enemies, the enemies of other Christian states who Rome wanted to make subservient to the papacy. Well, the Normans, meaning the Northmen, came down through Europe into Italy, and the papacy worried that the Normans are going to take over the popes. How can they direct these Norman armies, these warlords, eastward? So they had the brilliant idea of creating the Crusades. Essentially, they said there can only be one center of Christianity, and that's Rome. And to do that, we have to destroy Constantinople. We have to destroy the whole center of Christianity, meaning the surviving Christianity from the time that Constantine moved to the Roman Empire to the east and to Constantinople. And so the Crusades were mounted in the 1190s. What happened was a new kind of political organization was put in place in the Crusades that has characterized the entire West. Until the 12th century, all of the Near East, all of Europe, all of Asia and Eurasia was very tolerant. The Crusades were supposed to rescue the Holy Land, Jerusalem, from the Muslims, to free it. The problem is that Jerusalem and the Near East didn't need saving. The Christians were already there. There was all throughout the Near East and Eurasia, there was not an ethnic conflict. There was a live and let live. Even the Jewish population was quite well situated in Germany, which was the German king was always the official head of the Holy Roman Empire. Well, what happened in the Crusades? There were actually two parts of the First Crusade. There was a sort of crazy hermit, Peter the Hermit, who mobilized populist troops to go to Jerusalem to help kill the Muslims. On the way, they killed all of the Jewish population that they could find in Germany. This was the first anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish pogroms that the Catholic Church backed. They then, the Norman troops then followed them, moved to Constantinople, and moved down from Constantinople into Jerusalem. Now, at the time in Jerusalem, as I said, there was the Muslims, the Christians, all were tolerant of each other. There was no ethnic fighting, but the Crusaders got in. They refused to negotiate with the existing heads of Jerusalem, and they came in and they killed the entire Islamic population. And the historians of the Crusade, the chroniclers who were there at the time, talked about the Crusaders going, and after the Muslims had been killed, the troops came and were cutting open the stomachs of the corpses to see whether they'd swallowed any gold coins or silver coins to keep them safe from being looted. So, and then a century later, the Crusades were still going on, and they sacked Constantinople. And obviously, as you know, the Christians lost Jerusalem to the Muslims, led by Saladin, who was a Kurd, and subsequent Egyptian troops. And the Crusades were basically fought against other Christian countries, against southern France, where the original Christians survived very much through the Cathars. They fought against Germany, that resisted Italian papal control. They fought against Sicily, where the Muslims still had maintained control all the way through Spain. And the Catholics founded the Inquisition essentially to kill everyone who didn't accept Roman control. Well, the reason I'm saying all this is very parallel today. The idea of going to Jerusalem, going to the land that is now called, going to Palestine, and then driving out the whole population and insisting on total control by the West. Except this time, the control isn't by Rome, it's by the United States with its vassal England. And England and the United States both backed the creation of the State of Israel as a Western state in the middle of Islam, that basically would be what often is called America's landed aircraft carrier for a military base to use to conquer Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and ultimately Iran. And Iran has always been the major objective of the war in the Near East that really began with the founding of the State of Israel, and is continuing. And from the American point of view, it looks at Israel in the same way that it looks at the Ukraine. Just as we're fighting to the last Ukrainians in order to weaken Russia by having it use its ammunition all up fighting NATO in Ukraine, we're willing to have Israel do the fighting against, lead the fighting against the Palestinian and the rest of the Arab population to essentially move in conjunction with the United States to take over the Near East, to control the oil in the Near East. The Near East for America, for England, and for the West has always been about oil. Look at what's happening now is the continuation of the oil war. Well, not only Iran, but also Yemen, where the Houthis have been fighting against Saudi Arabia for quite a few years now, have said that if they are threatened, they will simply sink ship in the Strait of Hormuz. Here's Iran, and here's where the Red Sea, and here's where the waterway goes for the oil that is going to be sent from Saudi Arabia and from the United Arab Republics, Qatar, and Kuwait to the west. The blocking the sea lanes will prevent the oil from being transmitted. And again, this will isolate the whole rest of the world, Europe as well as Eurasia, from Near Eastern oil. And so what appears to be a religious fight, just as in the Crusades appeared to be a fight for liberation, you liberate them by killing them and sending them either to heaven or hell, depending on what your religion is. You're having a replay of the Crusades today as a power play. And that's why George W. Bush called his attack on Iraq a crusade.
This crusade, this war on terrorism, is going to take a while, and the American people must be patient.
The crusade was meant to destroy Iraq, to destroy the culture, to destroy Islam, to destroy the population. This is literally the Crusades, and that's why it's so important to look at what happened to the Crusades in the 12th and 13th century, because that is basically, it was the Crusades that led to Christianity in the modern form, which is against everything that the original Christianity was for. The papacy in the Crusades had one problem. The whole root of the Catholic Church, just like Islam, had been such a revulsion against the creditor oligarchy of the Roman Empire and against the oppression by the creditors of taking over the land, of reducing the population to bondage as a result of debt, that usury, meaning lending at interest, was banned. In Islam, they created a Sharia law that said you can lend and take an equity portion. You can share in the gains of the borrower, but you can't charge interest. In the West, one church, every century, the church council would ban church members from practicing usury. They would denounce usury. But the problem is, how was Rome, the papacy, going to mount a military campaign to conquer the Christian centers in Constantinople, to conquer Antioch, to make war on Egypt and on Jerusalem, so that it could take over the name of the Christian church? Well, obviously, there's only one way to fight, and you had to pay mercenaries. That meant you had to borrow money, but the Vatican didn't have money. How was it going to have the money to pay the troops? Well, this is the same problem that the United States has had ever since the Korean War in 1950. For the Vatican, the response was to abolish the Christian opposition to usury by saying, we're going to, when a Christian makes a loan of usury, it's not usury, we'll call that interest. And there were the schoolmen, the theologians of the Christian church in the 12th and 13th century developed a whole set of loopholes that Italian bankers and Transalpine bankers, just to the north of the Alps, there was Cahors, there were all sorts of Lombards in the north Italy. You had a revival of private sector banking, and it was the Catholic Church itself that sponsored the revival of banking, the revival of interest-bearing debts, and the popes, instead of excommunicating the bankers, instead of excommunicating the people who charged usury, the popes excommunicated the opponents of usury. If there were church bishops in England or elsewhere that opposed the kings, such as Henry III, from going into debt, borrowing money to fight the Vatican's wars, the churchmen were excommunicated. If a ruler opposed usury in his kingdom, like the Germans did, they would be excommunicated. If there were parliamentary reformers that tried to that backed in 1215 the Great Charter, the Magna Carta, they were the leaders of parliament were excommunicated. This is the kind of fight that you have today. The fight for financial control of Christendom, of the West, in order to use the financial system to finance your military takeover of your target areas, as much of the world as you can bite, stems from this period. So the problem in the history books, you read about the fact that England and France expelled the Jews in 1290 from England, in the late 13th century and early 14th century in France. And the propaganda is the Jews were driven out because they lent money for usury. But that's not the case at all. The Jews were expelled because they were not lending for usury, because they'd been crowded out by the Lombard bankers and the Hudson bankers, and all of the wealth had been taxed away and just grabbed by the kings. And so the Jews were no longer relied upon to provide credit. The Italian bankers were empowered to provide credit. And by 1515, you had the bankers, instead of being at the outskirts of society, held in contempt by saying, oh, only foreigners can dirty their hands with money lending, the bankers rose to the very top of society, including the papacy itself. So the Medici, who made their great profits by money lending, the Medici Pope Leo X in 1515 essentially abolished all the Catholic opposition to usury and led the Austrian bankers essentially to take over, Italian bankers, Dutch bankers. You had a whole transformation of the Western financial system, basically for war financing. And this is what made the modern era so different from antiquity. In antiquity, it was mainly the poor who went into debt. But in the Middle Ages, ever since the Middle Ages, it's the governments that went into debt. It's the top of the economic pyramid that went into debt. It was the kings that went into debt, the nobility that went into debt. And they went into debt to fight a Christian war to kill the non-Christians, or whoever the Vatican didn't like, to kill any Christian church that did not follow the papacy, with all of the nuttiness that you see today, the crazy Christian fundamentalism that broke off from this basically inquisition that you're having today. And the result is the kind of Orwellian vocabulary justifying the attack on the rest of the world that has reversed the whole way of how the rest of the world had done diplomacy. Well, after the Crusades ended in the 1290s, they had weakened the Constantinople to such an extent that the Ottomans, essentially the Turks, took over. And the Ottoman Empire continued the whole Near Eastern Eurasian attitude of tolerance. There was tolerance towards the Jewish population, tolerance towards the Christians. There was not the intolerance, this whole idea of intolerance, that either you're a member of our gang, of our church, or else you're going to go to hell, and we will try to kill you because we don't consider you human. That is the attitude that spread. It took about almost 1,000 years for that attitude to spread from Christianity to via the Holocaust to the Zionist reaction against this, the self-defense that led to the Zionist movement to move into Palestine and permit itself to have a symbiosis with first the British Empire and then the American Empire to act in tangent with the British, Americans, and with NATO, essentially to fight the tolerant world. So what you're having and what we've been discussing here for the last 2 years of the world breaking into two different diplomatic and political and social units, you have an intolerant West that essentially wants to try to control other countries by sponsoring wars and color revolutions. Every country that it can, on the borders of China, on the borders of Russia. You're finding the fight now in Armenia is an example of that. On the borders of the Near East and Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, and Iraq. You're having the West sponsor wars everywhere, trying to divide and conquer. And you're having the rest of the world, China, Russia, Eurasia, much of the global South, being much more tolerant, much more multi-ethnic. And so what is basically a nationalist military and financial war of the United States and its satellites in Europe and English-speaking Australia and New Zealand, on the one hand, saying we're at war with the rest of the world. We make the rules as our new religion of American control, and you have to follow them. And then you have the rest of the world trying to work with each other and being united and going in its own way. As you've probably seen from the news broadcasts in China, the violence in Gaza and the violence in the West Bank has been so shocking to most people's morality outside of the United States. The United States in the news cheers when there's bombing of the hospitals. We're killing the enemy. We're sending them to hell. That's what essentially President Biden says. But the rest of the world looks at this with absolute shock and says, this is fascism. This is the anti-humanism. This is anti-civilization. When you have in Germany, Baerbock saying, we have to save the environment. The problem with the environment is human beings. We need atomic war. We need atomic war now to wipe out the human race so that let evolution start all over again. From the mice, from the rats, from the cockroaches, Americans have destroyed the environment. We have to get rid of the human beings and end the Anthropocene. You have Germany and the Green Movement there, and much of Europe saying it's time to wipe out the world. This is what the West is threatening. And this is why they're expecting in the next few months, all of this is going to come to a head. Will Iran be attacked and will Lebanon, the Hezbollah, be attacked and respond by essentially wiping out Palestine and say, well, the settlement of a Jewish state saying, we're going to come in and we're going to kill everybody who's there because we cannot work with people who do not share our religion, our Judeo-Christian religion. Well, you're having two different ideas of what civilization is all about. The West civilization is feudalism, a return to total control of all the rest of the world, and an inquisition, which was formed in the basically in the 13th century. In America, there are very popular songs about the Inquisition, and like the Singing Nun was a song about the Saint Dominic founding it and killing the Catholic, killing people who didn't agree with what the Roman Church told them to believe. It's almost difficult for people who are not part of the American hate culture to realize how different the way of looking at the world is from the West compared to the global majority. And what you're having right now is, I think, something has been changed in people's minds throughout the world. What's changed is, I think, my God, there really is a part of the planet that is looking at civilization as a way of essentially wiping out people who don't agree to let their government be appointed by the United States. and let the United States sort of take control of the economy. You're having, there's a realization that they have to work together. And of course, the only way of working together is to be tolerant of each other's religion, of ethnicity, and to be have exactly the opposite feeling that Christianity as a religion of hatred has spread to Zionism and to the Judeo-Christian West as a kind of religious wrapping for its military and economic and above all financial control of the rest of the world, including the control of its oil and energy and its opposition to any attempt to stop global warming, if that means using less oil, less gas, and less coal. So you're having essentially the West as part of its system of military and financial control, meaning the implementing it creates a dynamic of global warming that is causing drought and havoc throughout the world, including China's weather and drought that is impairing China's own ability to feed itself and Asia's ability to feed itself, and the same thing in Africa and other countries. There's really a war for the survival of civilization that's going on right now. And it's no longer just a nationalistic fight between Russia and China on the one hand, along with Iran, and the United States, England, and NATO on the other. It's literally a fight for the survival of civilization.